There is justice according to which we take a man's life, but no justice according to which we take his death. That is nothing but cruelty. Friedrich Nietzsche. Today, I will read to you my essay on euthanasia for old people. Enjoy. I was going to put a trigger warning, but then I remembered your ancestors fought mammoths. As a medical student, we learn a lot about organs, how one stays alive, and the physiology of the human body. Next to life, we are also forced to confront death, which is a reality waiting for us all. In some cases where a patient suffers without hope, the patient can, by his own volition, choose for the process of euthanasia. What is euthanasia? Euthanasia literally means in Greek, the good death. It is medically assisted suicide. The General Practitioners Commission says that it is a part of their job, but can definitely be taxing on the emotions. After all, it is taking someone's life. Luckily, euthanasia can only be done when several medical professionals deem a case to be without improvement for the foreseeable future. I myself agree that someone should be able to choose this for themselves. However, some arguments are now made to make euthanasia basically a right for almost everyone. First of all, let me explain why I am against euthanasia for everyone. I do not believe suffering to be without hope. I think for there to be suffering, one is hoping for it to be something else. You cannot suffer if you accept your current predicament. I do not deny the fact that someone may feel pain, but to suffer from that pain is ultimately a choice. It would therefore be unwise to rob young people of the opportunity to find hope and meaning in their suffering. Before we get into the writings of Nietzsche, here's a controversial case of euthanasia performed in the Netherlands, where a mother of two decided to end it all because of the suffering caused by her tinnitus. Check out my video on Beethoven to learn more about tinnitus and how hearing works in the brain. Now, tinnitus can definitely be terrible. I suffered from it myself as well. I still have it, but I no longer suffer from it as much. Tinnitus for me is a fact, one which I do not control, and one that therefore cannot be given so much power to decide over the fate of my life. Now, for this woman, the suffering caused by the tinnitus was so much that she made the decision to leave her children. The doctors agreed that her suffering was too much, and they performed euthanasia on her. She left 2 children and a husband, but at least she did not suffer. I do not think it to be ethical in this case to allow for the assisted suicide of this woman, for the risk of a motherless life for these children can be very high. In this paper, you can see that the life outcome for children with divorced or dead parents are worse compared to people who have parents who are together. Therefore, this is an edge case where I am opposed to the euthanasia performed. If this woman really wanted to die, she would do it either way, and perhaps that could have been more traumatizing to her children. But I think that if she found a meaning in the suffering, she could upkeep her life and care for her children. To put it boldly, I don't think she cared for her children more than she cared for herself. Her own suffering outweighed the care she could have given, and then she decided to die. Now this case brings me to Aquinas. In his theological compendium, the Summa Theologica, Aquinas makes 3 arguments against suicide. The first one rings: everything naturally loves itself, and as a result, everything naturally keeps itself in being, and resists corruption in so far as it can. Wherefore suicide is contrary to the inclination of nature and to charity, whereby every man should love himself. Hence suicide is always a mortal sin, as being contrary to the natural law and to charity. Aquinas basically says that the living and natural thing loves oneself and therefore protects oneself. If one therefore were to kill himself, this would go against the deepest nature of the being and therefore be a sin. I'm going to argue against this and use the idea of self-love and self-preservation to make the case for assisted suicide. But first, the second argument, one which I agree with and speaks as such. Every part as such belongs to the whole. Every man, therefore, is part of a community. By killing himself, he injures the community. This argument is clearly manifested in a case I talked about. You probably know someone who has killed themselves, and you can recall how much grief it still causes. While we must not forget, the biggest aggression has been done to the person themselves. Thirdly, here shines Aquinas' Christian beliefs through his rationality. Because life is God's gift to man, and is subject to his power, the one who kills and makes to live. Hence, taking one's life is to sin against God, even as who kills another slave sins against the slave's master. He usurps to himself a judgment of a matter not entrusted to him, for it belongs to God alone to pronounce sentence of death and life. Personally, I do not believe this to be a right argument, as I do not see myself to be the slave of the God told here. Maybe I am, but the God in this argument seems to me to be randomness of nature, of health, of who gets to live another day and who dies in traffic. This arbitrariness is given will as to make it more bearable. These arguments were made by arguably the smartest person in Western history. Now, we are going to argue for assisted suicide for people dependent on care, which will be used interchangeably with suicide, as in my eyes, it is basically the same, except with more steps and perhaps bureaucracy. But there are some merits to the idea of being able to kill oneself. There's a lot of power in knowing that you are able to end it, if you saw fit. In his book Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche writes in paragraph 157, "The thought of suicide is a powerful solace. By means of it, one gets through many a bad night." Now, speaking personally, there have been days and evenings and times where I was more angsty and unsure of the world, where I thought, if it gets really bad, I can always kill myself. This might be a morbid thought, but it gave me the power and the insight to realize that I have control over a thing. I have control over ending it or enduring it, and eventually bettering it. Now, when we look at this thought in a medical context, most medical interventions are done in the last months of someone's life. And if one were to end up in a care home, they can become less able than before to take care of themselves. We see in my country, the Netherlands, that old people suffer from loneliness as more and more of their peers bite the dust. Now imagine an old person sitting in a wheelchair in his room at night. He has oxygen blowing through his nose and a lot of pain in his lower back. The pain reminds him of the times with his wife where heavy arguments would also flare up the back pain. He sheds a tear in melancholy at his present situation, realizing it will never be the same. Now this night seems packed with suffering and grief. The thought of ending it all can be as liberating as not caring about the pain. This could then give the old man a better good night's sleep, knowing that if it really became bad, he could opt out. Now, living on would be a brave act for this man, as the suffering has a high chance of recurring. But still, allowing one to think of this option, to not offer it to them, but to make them aware of the fact that it is a possibility, offers one a hypothetical escape route, a morbid one at that, but still. The third argument of Aquinas is talking about the natural death ordained by God. But natural death, as opposed to assisted suicide, is very arbitrary. It just happens to you. With euthanasia, one can choose rationally to die. In a later book, Human All Too Human, Part 2, our mustache-toting hammer philosopher says in paragraph 185, which is more reasonable, to stop the machine when the works have done the task demanded of them, or to let it run on until it stands still of its own accord, in other words, is destroyed? Is the latter not a misuse of strength and care of those who serve? Are men not throwing away that which would be sorely needed elsewhere? Is not a kind of contempt of the machines propagated in that many of them are so uselessly tended and kept up? I am speaking of involuntary, natural, and voluntary, reasonable death. It is not difficult to make the connection of the machine being the human at old age. Is it a misuse of strength to upkeep these people? Asks Nietzsche. I don't know. Perhaps it is, perhaps it is not. Are we not throwing away what could be used elsewhere? Well, a lot of tax money is being spent on care for the elderly, which is a good thing. To care for other people is good. But money is not infinite, at least not in the real sense of the value it represents. You cannot infinitely throw money in the care of the elderly, because other matters also need to be attended to. Now, there are multiple videos on YouTube talking about the lack of houses. Perhaps some houses could be built by virtue of decreasing this care. Now, the third question Nietzsche poses is the most biting one. A kind of contempt is definitely being felt by some impatient caretakers in the old people homes. How many stories have been told about carers abusing their tenants? Perhaps one has seen videos of this in action. This even happens when tired mothers decide to abuse their children for the contempt they inspire by their constant neediness. This is a dark fact of being human, that patience can run thin for some people and that can cause more hurt. It is sad, but true. Being aware of this fact can help us become better people, to know that there is this contempt which can grow in us and not to allow it to grow any further. Contempt then is a strong force for humans. If it can drive infanticide, what more could it be the cause of? Now, this contempt is not only for the caretakers. The elderly or the person himself could feel this contempt towards him or herself as well. During my internship at the care homes, some less merry individuals were constantly beating themselves up verbally at every chance given to them. They felt inept. In their own eyes, they were contemptible. How could I become this way? Just 20 years ago, I was in relatively good health. At least I could still wash myself. What has become of me? And this contempt was painful to see and pity-inspiring. This is why I think Nietzsche speaks of the rational death, the one that is voluntary. If one is able to die voluntarily, one can take away this contempt that could be felt for oneself. It could allow someone to choose, for one last time, how they are to spend their time. Giving people then the chance to choose rationally on how they die could be of merit for themselves if they want to not feel this contempt towards themselves that badly. Now, I am aware of the fact that thinking rationally is difficult, and what most of the rational thinking men do is just an after effect of their emotions. Therefore, it is a difficult question on whether it is actually rational to choose to die, or if it's a way to escape their emotions. It could be very easy to verbalize this wish in such a way that it seems rational. However, taking away the option to do so would be more cruel than allowing people to rationalize their emotions. Preserving their autonomy and emotional freedom then is what happens, which I think is ethically more sound than paternalistically taking away this choice. There is also a risk in living on. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche's prophet says, "Many die too late, others too early. The doctrine sounds strange. Die at the right time." What this would mean is not exactly made clear by Nietzsche. But in a modern world, some elders do live on for years in ways where they are totally dependent on care and machines, which could cause a lack of honor towards oneself and eventually contempt, as said before. The self-regard and pride of these people can then be damaged, and the choice to preserve the self-regard and pride could be given in the way of euthanasia, so that everyone, according to their own will, can die at their chosen time. Therefore, I say that self-preservation goes further than only the flesh. You might still be a bit confused about Zarathustra's doctrine of dying at the right time. An example in not-so-ancient history gives us a view of what this might look like. In Imperial Japan, the samurais had their seppuku. Once a samurai was either captured, tortured, maimed, or dishonored, they would consciously choose to die at the right time, instead of spreading the dishonor to their families. This was seen as rational and honorable because one showed the will of the warrior. For this fighting aristocracy, honor was the highest value, and preserving it the highest good. It would be damaging for the community if this was not done. The work of the individual, fighting for the honor of the family, was complete, and to keep living, the honor would then be in danger. It was therefore morally responsible and expected to take your own innards out of your stomach. In Dostoevsky's magnificent novel, The Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha gets the quest of giving 200 rubles to a poor captain so that he may take care of his family. When the captain sees the money and realizes it is for himself, he is elated. He talks about all the good he can do and how his sick son will be helped by the medicine he can buy. But suddenly, the captain's face goes pale. He looks with frenzied eyes at Alyosha and asks, "Do you mind if I show you a trick?" He grabs the 200 rubles, crumples it up, and throws it on the ground, while defiantly jumping on it. He screams out, "There with your money!" After a crater of dirt is left in the ground, He looks at virtuous Alyosha with a look of pride and runs away. Pride is what humans are guarding almost constantly, and is therefore a way of preserving oneself. This showcase of how the philosophy of self-preservation goes further than things beyond the flesh is masterfully written by Dostoevsky. I highly recommend reading the book, link in the description. This psychology also exists in old people homes, where some tenants refuse to be helped and proudly try to do their own thing, however impossible it may be. A woman who I saw had a stroke, which caused her not to be able to move any of her limbs. A nurse was feeding her so that she could survive. She was already underweight. Anytime the nurse would get close to her mouth with the spoon, she would move her head in a rhythm and evade any attempt to reach her mouth. I saw how someone's own pride was more important than surviving. Just like the captain, they both knew they could benefit from the money or the food, but decided to preserve their own pride. Therefore, self-preservation goes further than only the flesh. It could come in the form of preserving honor and pride, like we have seen in the samurai and in the captain. Therefore, I argue that for the well-being of the elderly, it is of import that we have the option of assisted suicide for the elderly people, so that they can decide what they want to preserve and rationally decide if they are dying too early, too late, or at the right time. In conclusion, we saw the arguments given by Aquinas about self-preservation and damaging the community, and that these can both be arguments for assisted suicide. Does man want to preserve the body, or do they want to preserve the self-image they have of themselves, of being honorable, or being able to take care of themselves and achieve great things? Do you want to choose how the story ends? It remains a difficult choice. Therefore, I say that it should be possible for older people to know that the choice of euthanasia is a possibility, and that they can attempt to rationally decide on how and when to die. This choice should only be contained for people who do not have the bodily autonomy to do it themselves. So that means if someone is dependent on care in such a way that they cannot eat, shower, or clean themselves, this option should be open to them. Thank you for watching this video essay on a topic that is definitely difficult. I must say that a year before I would be of the complete opposite side of the spectrum. I'm not saying that people should be killed, but that they should have the freedom to decide to do so. And me being able-bodied actually gives me the freedom to do so. And this essay was more aimed at people who are living in old people homes and are so dependent on care that the option of actually dying is taken away from them. Before I would say that they could not have this opportunity, but I realize now that this is another form of cruelty. Let me know what you think in the comments, and perhaps I will change my mind as well. All in all, medical ethics is a topic with a lot of gray areas, and therefore do not extrapolate my views towards situations where people are young and depressed, because I believe there's a great opportunity for hope. See this more as a way of reinterpreting the strongest arguments against suicide in a new light. Thanks for watching, and subscribe.